Hello and welcome to the Corporate Facility Council's first Wednesday webinar, Apples to Apples Proposals from Your Fire Alarm and Life Safety RFP. Our presenter today is Patrick, and I do want to let everyone know that you have been muted for audio quality. If you have any questions at any time during the webinar, please type them into the question box. I'll be happy to go over them during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. I also want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Corporate Facility Council's website, ifmacfc.org. At this time, I'm happy to turn it over to Wayne Witzel, the CFC Secretary and Programs Chair. Wayne, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joshua. As always, thank you to our IFMA HQ components team for helping us put these webinars on. We really appreciate everything you do for all the components, so thank you. Excited today because I have Patrick Hallett in studio, so to speak, to talk about something that we're talking about core issues in facilities, and it really doesn't get any more core or basic than health and safety in the facility. I mean, that's our number one priority. So it's important, for us periodically to maybe move back from the bleeding cutting edge of some of this stuff we've been talking about and really reiterate some of these core concepts that sometimes, and after talking with Pat, sometimes don't really get the attention they deserve or need. I've known Pat for quite some time. I'm going to let him give his own bio here because he's got a lot to say, but I will just say one thing. He's the immediate past president of the IFMA Silicon Valley chapter, one of my 4 home chapters. I've got 4, and he was a fantastic president and excellent leader of that chapter, and now just serves as kind of the elder statesman guiding us and herding those cats at our chapter. But Patrick, would you tell us a little bit more about your company and about yourself and what it is you do?
Sure. Thanks, Wayne. Well, I've been in the industry, the fire, life safety, and asset protection business for about 25 years, almost 26 now. And I've only worked for 2 companies. Currently, I work for Saba International, which is a division of Science Building Solutions. It's a 50-year-old, going to be celebrating its 50th anniversary at the end of this year. So great organization, kind of a Silicon Valley known entity, but we're also part of a company that has a national footprint. So it's exciting. It's an exciting industry. It's exciting times for us because we're growing leaps and bounds. So really what I do, Wayne said, I'm the immediate past president of IFMA Silicon Valley. I'm the director of business here, business development, sales and marketing for Saba, and have been doing that for 10 years. I've also been the past president of the Association for Facilities Engineering in the Silicon Valley, and I really enjoy educating people on many different things, but really this topic is near and dear to my heart because as my business shows, the FMs are challenged sometimes with understanding all the things that are necessary in life safety, and it's my job to educate them and help them to understand and build a better RFP. So we're going to talk a little bit about that.
Fantastic. Yeah, so this, so the folks here, Patrick, as I explained to you, are very used to talking about RFPs, talking about procurement and sourcing and some of the challenges we face there. The 2 complaints I hear most pretty much from FMs are from design and architecture, putting things in that now they have to maintain that they had no say in. And then the other is sometimes they want to procure a service, but once it gets into the hands of sourcing and procurement, they don't get what they wanted. It goes through some kind of a grist mill there at sourcing, and they don't get apples to apples back, which is really the title of your presentation, really how to get apples to apples. And I'm fond of saying a lot of RFPs I see are written so that the company is going to get apples to helicopters back. It's not even, they're not even going to be in the same species of a response. So I think if you could take us through and walk us through, step by step, what it's going to take to develop that RFP, what's that process, and how can we go way upstream and solve this problem up there instead of what tends to happen is everything is chaos at the end and you've got to wrangle chaos. So I guess to me, would that start with developing, how do you develop that correct scope of work? Would that be really step number one as you see it?
Yeah, really, we're a code-driven industry. So everything that we do is based in fire code, and the code standards are put out by NFPA. And NFPA has guidelines for fire alarm systems, special hazards, sprinkler systems, and those codes are adopted by the states that we live in. And when they adopt that code, it is the law. It is what you are required to follow. And all laws are required to be followed to the letter of the law. The challenge that we have is the enforcement arm. The authorities having jurisdiction don't always know even that the code changed and what it entails, because they have so many facets to their own jobs. And so the enforcement is where we see the challenges. Some states are better than others, and some jurisdictions are better than others in doing that. But it's really not up to them. It's really up to the building owners and managers that are agents for those owners to follow the code. And when there's an incident that happens, in a building, whether it's a property damage or an injury or a loss of life, it's really the owners and their insurers and those building managers that have the responsibility. And court cases have shown if you don't have the documentation to back up what you're required to do, you can be challenged in a lawsuit. So that's what we try and do for our clients, is help them to understand that first, require that in their RFPs if that's their goal, but always to know what responsibilities they have.
So let me ask you right there. So it seems to me like most of your FMs might have some idea of code in their jurisdictions, but with things changing or a new rule might be coming down the pike in a couple of years that you see as a subject matter expert that they should be aware of now for planning purposes. But it seems to me you're saying that even the enforcers who come through, so let's say it's a fire inspector, they may not catch a particular problem because they might not be looking for it that day. But if there's an issue, you're still going to be on the hook for that as the building owner, FM, et cetera, whatever, for not seeing that. Just because the fire marshal comes in and inspects, doesn't see it, you're still on the hook for it. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yep, you're correct. It's not your vendor that's responsible for it either. If your vendor tried to get you to do it, or they skated it and you didn't, recognize that, they're never going to be at fault. It's always you that's going to be at fault for not doing that. So yeah, real common code changes. The code cycles for NFPA 72, which governs fire alarm systems, for instance, changes every 3 years. There's a new code cycle, new code requirements every 3 years. Now, sometimes they don't change very much, but sometimes they change pretty dramatically. In the 2010 code, documentation changed dramatically, and I still see the enforcement not always there in every jurisdiction for what's required in NFPA for documentation. And basically, every device location, including the audible visuals, have to be identified, the type of device, the location of the device, and whether it passed or failed. And that all seems simple, but if it's not enforced, you'll see a lot of inspectors that are out there trying to, win a bid, low price, not doing everything that they're required because they know that in that jurisdiction it might not be enforced. But when you court, the enforcement happens, right? So that's where it's critical.
So that seems to me a big step one is reach out to a subject matter expert such as yourself as you're concocting this RFP and making sure that it actually meets the current standards that are out there instead of just pulling up that RFP you did 3, 6, 5 years ago, whatever, and reissuing that because things could have dramatically changed with those requirements.
Yeah, what I always suggest to my prospective clients is that they, during an RFP, that they request a sample copy of the documentation from the vendors that are bidding the job. And that way they'll see, if it meets the standards. First, you have to understand the standards, but they're pretty simple. And as long as it meets the standards or exceeds the standards, and many people out there exceed the standards, it's gonna be in your best interest.
So what would be the next step? So is there, in terms of what you would require from a vendor?
Yeah, so different organizations have different goals, and it may be a one building RFP, or it may be a campus, or it may be a large entity that's building multiple campuses and has multiple services, right? So realistically, the vetting process is really important. In life safety, sprinklers, which are building safety, asset protection, they're pretty vanilla. A sprinkler is a sprinkler, it's pipe and water and valves. But fire alarm systems are proprietary, and they're what monitors those, and they do the detection of the fires, and that's the life safety aspect of it. So some footprints might have proprietary nature to them, right? So manufacturer product, and all of us companies can test that equipment, but not all of them can reprogram or expand those systems. And if that's something that's going to happen in your property on a large scale, you might want to hire a representative that represents that product, okay? Other properties that we see out there are built over time, or they acquire systems that are disparate, right? So you have a lot of different manufacturers, and you may never achieve that goal. Or you may say, hey, you know what? I got to have the company in this building that can do everything on this system. So that would be part of your RFP, right? Is vetting that out, making sure that they have the credentials, making sure that they have enough staff that has the technical expertise to handle that.
So it's one thing to be a company that can, quote, is a dealer or can service this type of equipment, but how many people on staff do you actually have that are certified and trained to do that?
Right. And in some cases, Wayne, it doesn't matter in some buildings, right? So for instance, all of us in the industry should be able to procure parts for even other manufacturers. We might pay a little bit higher price, but we can get the components to do component level replacements of smoke detectors, pull stations, modules, that type of thing. But when it comes to expanding those systems, you might have to hire somebody that's certified in that equipment and can do the drawings and that aspect of the job. But for instance, in a school or a hotel, the systems don't change that much, right? Once they're built, they pretty much stay the same. So there's not a lot of expansion going on. Whereas in a hospital or a campus that's forever changing and expanding, you want to pick your vendor wisely and pick your vendors that can help you on that side of it too, if that's important too.
You mentioned different types of schools, hospitals. Talk to me about geography, because I know oftentimes I'll see RFPs that are national that come across my desk, and we are a national company. But how does that work in terms of your vertical, what you service? Is it wise for a large, multinational or national company to try to procure one vendor to service all their locations spread across geography? How does that work?
It's really, really hard. However, I've seen a trend lately with the larger Fortune 500 companies that are picking their technology right first and saying, this is the technology I'm going to put in all my buildings that I build, right? And we know some of those companies out there, the FANGs and the likes of the FANGs that are out there building big footprints. It makes sense for them to do that, because then they can hire a national company and get what they want, right? Get the right type of service. I see the other side of it though, where procurement departments will go out and they put out a bid that's very loose, provide me NFPA 72 testing on my fire alarm systems. And they don't even put out a list. They put out a real estate list with square footage and maybe numbers of floors, but they don't put out the equipment, right? And so for any company to try and take something like that on, especially if it's a large quantity of disparate systems, it usually ends up being an experience and a nightmare.
Mm-hmm. Is that when you find you get most of your clients during the nightmare phase?
I will tell you that probably some of the best long-term customers I have are the ones that have had really bad experiences, and I think that's, you just have to be open and honest. I walk away from more business than I get, than I try to get.
Mm-hmm.
I think that more people should try and do that, because you have to be able to take care of the customer. Otherwise, the relationship won't last. And in this industry, the lasting relationships are really the ones that become, mutually beneficial.
I think we can definitely blame the RFP in many cases for failed relationships between vendor and professional member. If it's set up to fail at the beginning and everybody's playing a game, and the game is set up by the client and their procurement department, and we get this thing that comes across our desk, we look at it and say, man, this is chaos. But our bosses are telling us, go ahead and bid it. Figure out a way. We'll just get to the second round, and then we'll figure out a way to deal with it. It's a game that's played. We've talked about this at these council meetings before. But it's, as a subject matter expert, what I hear you saying is like, look, this is an area more than anything that you've got to be. It's code driven, so it's more black and white than it is gray area in a lot of ways. That there's certain things that have to get done according to code, and you need specific information in order to give them that information. And then you overlay this other thing of site specific requirements depending on the building, the jurisdiction. It's a very complex thing. And then you see this RFP come across that says, oh, just give me NFP 72.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, gosh, what a catch-all for so much complexity there.
Yeah.
So in terms of could you just maybe walk us through, like, if a client called you up now and said, hey, Patrick, I'm thinking of putting together an RFP, could you talk with us about that, and kind of what would you look for on a site if you came out and did a site review? What are the kinds of things you're going to look out for?
Sure. So first thing, let's take it as an individual building, right? The goal of an individual building is to be efficient. When you have a company that can do multiple aspects of the work in a building, so say a company like Saba that's a fire alarm, a special hazards, a sprinkler or suppression licensed contractor, we manage fire alarm systems, kitchen hoods, all that type of stuff, right? If you have a single building and you're that type, you should always be looking for that type of vendor, because there are several of our services that we provide that have redundant inspections. For example, a fire alarm system monitors the sprinkler valves on a sprinkler system. I'm not going to get too technical, but those devices, those sprinkler valves, have to be tested under NFPA 72 and under NFPA 25, or Title 19 in California. And it's the same test. So if you had one company doing the test, they could document it. They could do the test once at the same time. Less impact on the building, right? Less impact on your tenants and occupants. And they can document it on both inspection reports that need to be completed for your documentation, right? So those are always good goals to look at, right? And it's always, if you're trying to achieve that goal of vendor reduction, efficiency in the testing program, less business disruption, those are the types of things that you want to try and achieve, right? So I always try and encourage people to look and see if that's a possibility. Now, in every building, that's not a possibility. In national footprints, that's not a possibility always, right? So, you want to you want to then take it to the next level. What services can I combine, right? Which ones should I not combine? Which ones are commodities? You know, I mean, do I really need to put my fire extinguishers under this RFP because they're somewhat of a commodity, right? Type item. I mean, there's not a lot of technology involved in it. Any fire extinguisher company can provide that service. It's more of a pricing thing, right? Does it need to be part of your RFP? Is it convenient for you to have it that one throat to choke, if you will, right? So those are all goals. When you get into the larger projects, it oftentimes ends up being, especially when there's disparate systems, can my company help me? Are they going to be better than having multiple vendors if I choose to do this, right? And I mean, that's really an interview process a lot of times, and a reference check, in my opinion, is can that company actually stand behind what they say they can do? Because honestly, all of us out there, you know, will tell you we can do it. It's, can they really do it? And do they make it a good experience for the customer?
Yeah. And I think everything you're saying is stuff that's upstream. It's stuff that you're talking about prior to the RFP. If that RFP goes out without understanding that there might be synergies and efficiencies that you could capture with that RFP by combining some of these tests, as you're saying, it's too late, or it's going to pop up, and it might be a strategic advantage that you might not even mention until you get to the second or third round with the client and say, oh, by the way, we can potentially combine things there. But sometimes they might have different timetables on those vendors, that one that's servicing this and one that's servicing that, and the twain shall never meet, and they lose that efficiency. So I think this definitely echoes what I've always recommended to FMs, is that you should be talking to other subject matter experts in your service lines throughout the cycle of the contract that's in place, so that when the next one comes up, you can put out a very informed RFP by talking to people like you and bringing them to site and saying, hey, tell me what you would change here, or tell me what you would do differently, or how does my documentation look? And I don't see, unfortunately, I don't see a lot of FMs doing that. And obviously, because most FMs are running around in a cold sweat, busy, you know, carrying you know, so much many tasks every day. But it's that strategic thing, I think, that we're missing in a lot of ways. And if we're going to be, you know, code is code, but you can add the strategic layer to it. It's not just this thing like, okay, this is what you have to do and let's move on. There are strategic ways to save money and increase efficiencies even with this, is what I'm hearing. It's just we've got to go upstream. We can't do that as easily after the RFP's been issued.
Yeah, you know, I always tell people to think about it. This is life safety. You know, it's not the place you want to cut corners on. It's the most, you know, if you get involved in it, it's the most costly, you know, lawsuit type, you know, litigious thing that could happen to you in your FM career. And you really need to make sure that you're getting what you're paying for. And really, documentation is really important. Standardization of documentation, using the forms that are required, having them in a repository. The forms are required to be kept for 5 years, is really important. I cannot tell you how many, I'm dealing with a major RFP right now, and it's 2 campuses, 77 buildings, 77 fire alarm systems, 59 sprinkler systems, a lot of documents. And the poor FM could not get the counts on their equipment. And that's the thing that is, it is, in this day and age, all that stuff should be at your fingertips. You know, it should be. And when they go through that experience, they realize they weren't getting what they were paying for, you know. So, you know, that's where I see the big fall down a lot in the RFPs also, is unfortunately for the FMs, they're taking over properties where they may not have managed the system before. They've got to go out and get pricing. They may have a challenge with their current vendor. It may be documentation, and then they've got to go get an RFP, and the vendors, you know, may not be able to, may not want to participate, you know, because if you don't have your documentation, that's a problem for us. If you don't have your drawings to your building, that's what tells us what we're supposed to be testing. and how we're supposed to test it, how it interfaces with the HVAC system, how it interfaces with the mass notification or the two-way communication or whatever you may have in your building. We don't have those documents, we really can't do our job. And if we can't do our job, we're not going to look good for you. And so those are the types of jobs sometimes that a good vendor will walk away from. You know?
Well, let's talk about that not good vendor. So that not good vendor is probably still going to bid that work. They might be the technically acceptable lowest price, the TALP, as I call them. They might be the technically acceptable lowest price, and they get awarded. Do you find that then they get into the facility and they start change ordering the daylights out of that contract because they find certain things?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, you see that strategy in some vendors that will come in low and just kill you on the back end. And I, you know, that usually gets vetted out. But realistically, I mean, it should be pretty standard. You know, you have in an RFP, you should understand what your hourly rates are, what your minimum service calls are, if there's any truck charges, whatever, right? You should kind of understand that. And I think that's really an important thing to always ask for in an RFP too, because not everybody does. But the vetting process, you know, talking to others that have used that vendor to find out, and don't always get that reference from the vendor because they're always going to give you your customer, right? Try and reach out to your FM friends and find out if they've had experience with these vendors. I mean, there's more good vendors than there are bad ones. Trust me, there are. This is a great industry, and I never like to speak poorly about my peers. Usually when they're not performing, it was because the customer went low price and didn't buy what they should have bought, and then they get the change order, right? It's the not knowing that, oh yeah, the 5-year costs this, but you have to do it in conjunction with the annual inspection also of the fire alarm system, where you're not doing the whole thing. And if you take a low price on that, the odds are they're going to find all kinds of things wrong with your sprinkler system. You know, they're going to get you. They may come in with that attitude. Hey, this is a really old system, I'm going to buy it, and then they're going to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in repairs. Right. So, you know, vet out the contractor in those situations. Really, really important.
I'd like to say to all the attendees that Patrick has put together an actual checklist of step-by-step items. So that's going to be emailed out to attendees of the webinar and members of the CFC. So you will get that. I know we're kind of talking about a lot of things here that you're capturing maybe on your notes, but we do have a checklist that Patrick has shown me previously that goes through all of this. So we'll be sending that out just to let everybody know. So so we're talking about price. So, how do you set those expectations so that you are getting competitive prices? Because we're talking about apples to apples, right? So there's code. I've talked to my subject matter experts. I've asked them what should be in my RFP. They've given me some listing of there's things I should look out for. I've had a couple of people, maybe I've looked at my IFMA associate members in my local chapter and said, hey, can you guys come out and look at my system? Tell me what you think. Give me some advice. And now, how do you set it up so you're going to get competitive prices and you can actually have a relationship with your vendor as opposed to it just being this transactional thing?
Sure. Well, I mean, we both should be interviewing each other, right? So, you really need to, as a vendor, have a great conversation with the person that's trying to hire you. If you can't, and you're just a price, that's never a good situation, right? I know you experienced that yourself, Wayne. But there's certain things, and you'll see some of these on the information we provide you after the webinar. Understanding what your insurance company requires, not just the authority having jurisdiction, because it may be different, is really important. Providing the contract terms to upfront I think is really, especially in this day and age. I mean, I have a large legal department now, which I didn't have when I first got into this industry, because in the old days, most of the contracts were my contract that was signed by my customer. Today, I get contracts from so many different places that we have to review and negotiate. And I think doing that up front is really, really important part of the RFP process, because you don't want to get to the end of it, the experience, and find out you can't do business for one reason or another. Okay. You know, providing people information about things like, you know, what hours can you be in my building? Are there secure spaces? Are there clean rooms? Are there, you know, what are the difficulties of working around my building? Those are really, really important things. And if your vendors aren't asking you for that, you should be wondering why, right? That's especially in the Silicon Valley and in the high tech industry. We work in a lot of places where there's, you know, just difficult hazards, difficult places, a lot of security necessary. You need to know those things, right? And you have to know that some companies aren't capable of working in those conditions too. They haven't provided the right training to their employees to do that. So, you know, if that's a requirement in your building, make sure it's really clear when you have that discussion and you roll that RFP out. You know, we talked a little bit about capabilities of technology. I think that's really, really important. Understanding whether your vendor is outsourcing any of the work, really, really important. If you're working in a healthcare environment, I will tell you healthcare codes are changing right now. They're governed by Joint Commission, not by the local fire inspectors. Joint Commission just imposed a new requirement on healthcare organizations that is treating their business occupancies just like a hospital. So the testing documentation requirements have changed. So if you're in that environment and you're on this call and you have any questions about that, let me know, because it's very new, very topical, just came into play in July, and most people are getting blindsided by it. Knowing what your local AHJ requirements are, because some are different. You know, San Francisco has some pretty unique things. Sunnyvale has some unique things. There's document repositories that some of the jurisdictions have now that you have to be aware of, because and time factors that you didn't have in the old days that are new, and those are specific to jurisdictions. UL requirements. So, you know, people aren't always aware of what UL is and what they do in our industry. Basically, the jurisdictions hire them to oversee, because they can't get to every building, what's going on in their jurisdiction, right? So we're an agent of UL. We issue a certificate on behalf of UL, and it gets audited, right? So at any time, UL can call you, and this is a requirement if you're in a UL jurisdiction, and say, I'm going to be at your building tomorrow, and I need to see this, 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 and this, and see all your documentation. And if it doesn't comply, they can pull your certificate and notify the authority having jurisdiction right away, right? So, you know, your vendor needs to be good at doing their job and telegraphing to you when you have deficiencies in either your documentation or your site. And you have to work towards rectifying that or getting a variance, one or the other. Okay. Good things to know. And no, not all fire alarm companies have the capability of issuing those certificates, believe it or not. So there are some that just don't have that capability because there's internal requirements. Interfacing with other technology in the building is something that oftentimes comes up. We have things like smoke barriers and dampers and elevators that fall under different vendors' requirements for inspections. But a lot of times we have the interface with those, so have to be involved in that testing. If that's something that happens in your building, understand it. Again, it's interesting, the enforcement around fire smoke dampers, we're starting to see heavily in the Silicon Valley in the last year. It's always been in the code that you do it, but oftentimes not done. And it's not your fire alarm company that usually does it. I mean, I have a vendor that does it for me, and I manage the service because we do it in tandem with our customers. But it's a mechanical test, right? It falls under NFPA 80. So interesting, you know, you need to know it. You need to be aware of those codes and the requirements, because again, it's all part of the building envelope. Schedules are really, really important, especially in manufacturing environments. Working in healthcare and operating theaters is always a challenge, and you have to work well with the team. Working in universities and higher education, which I do a lot, it is, you know, you have to work around those schedules of the students being in class, right? Nobody wants the audibles going off when, you know, they're during their normal school time. So you end up doing those tests on the holiday season. So things like that. Those are just some pointers, and you'll see a lot of this in the document that we provide. So,
you know, I'm really thinking a lot about Dr. Dean Kashawagi, who some of our members are familiar with. Dr. Dean is a proponent of the best value approach, or possibly the creator, I think, of the best value approach. And you know, he's diplomatic about it, but he has no compunction against saying to an FM, hey, if you didn't do due diligence on the front end with an SME and you procured a chaotic response, you have no one to blame but yourself and potentially your sourcing team for not doing the due diligence on the front end. And it seems to me there's I mean, I keep using this word upstream, and maybe it's subconscious because I've been reading the book by Dan Heath called Upstream. So that's probably why I keep saying that. But I'm always shocked and surprised at how many times I'll see an RFP come across my desk. I say to myself, gosh, this thing is awful. If only they would have asked me, I could have helped them. And I don't know really what it is, why organizations don't do it. I don't know whether it's a distrust or a disdain for vendors in some cases and associate members. I'm throwing darts at the wall. I don't know why, or if they don't think it's fair. But as far as I know, until that cone of silence goes down, you know, over the RFP, it's in your best interest to reach out to people and say, hey, what do you think about this? Come out and look, because all these things you just listed, to me, it almost sounds like an attorney. I mean, you're citing code, you know, NFP 80 dot, you know, paragraph 17, whatever. If I'm an FM, or if I'm a person going through something legal, I'm going to have an attorney who knows that, and I'm going to talk to them about this, and they're going to help me strategize. This sounds to me a very similar thing with you. It's just saying, okay, I need to narrow this list down to people who really understand my particular nuances that I have in my facilities. And I'm not really super equipped as an FM to know all the jargon and the nuance, and I might not see the efficiencies. I'm not an expert in everything. And this is an area where I really have to be, because it's life safety. I can get away with not cleaning the restroom sink incorrectly, and I'm not going to kill anybody, right? Or I'm not going to get hauled into court for not cleaning the restroom sink properly. So this is an area where I just really see, if I was in the FM shoes, I would be talking to people like you and saying, hey, come in and just look at my system. Come in and talk to me. Look at some of the reports I've been getting. You know, what do you think about these? Am I in compliance? You know, what will we change differently? And then aggregate that for your next RFP. It just seems to me that I couldn't. I'd be very nervous about putting out an RFP in fire life safety issues without doing that.
yeah.
Am I missing something? I mean, it seems to me that's a no-brainer.
No, I don't like to use that term no-brainer, because
Okay.
all have brains. We just sometimes don't have the education in there, right? And so, you know, you hit it on the head, though. This is life safety. It's not janitorial. No offense to your industry, right? It's not something that is it's something that can get very litigious, and very costly. I mean, I have one facility, if they have a false alarm, it's $800,000 an hour, if you one building, and
Wow.
you do not want to do something wrong in that building. And I actually gained that customer because we had the reputation of working in that environment, and knock on wood, in 18 years, I've never done that since the last vendor did it, and that's the type of thing that people are looking for. The cost really on the front end is not what you should always be looking at. It's the long-term cost and the business disruption avoidance that you really need to be sure that you're going to have, right? It's really important. I can't hit on that enough. So, I think one of the things I really haven't spoken a lot about is how do I do that? How do I have those conversations, especially when I walk into a situation where I haven't been served well in the past, and I don't have a lot of things that the vendors may need, right? Having a good, not rushing an RFP is really important. Laying out a good timeline, not a too fast timeline when you don't have all the information. Bringing the selected participants in and having a meeting about where you are strong and where you're deficient, and maybe why the last vendor isn't in the room today. Having that conversation candidly is really important, to build in that relationship. And you may lose people in that meeting, or they may embrace it. And if you do it well, if you put out a really good RFP, you shouldn't have a whole lot of, variation in price. It should be pretty clear playing field. And unless one of those parties is suspect, usually the suspect is the one that's really, really low or really, really high. Maybe they just didn't understand something, or it wasn't clear enough, right? And they're trying to cover their bases. So those discussions, the first discussion, and then of course the fair time for the RFIs and the doing your due diligence and getting them a fair response to those RFIs is really, really valuable to projects.
I'll add one thing to that I've experienced. I think getting everybody together in the room, to me, is it's still a little too late. And the reason being is I've been in rooms where I see a strategic advantage of something I could put on the RFP, on my response, that the client hasn't picked up on, and none of these people in the room have maybe not picked up on. I don't know, but I'm certainly not going to ask that question or mention it, because now all these other people are going to be thinking about it and take away my strategic advantage. And that's just the way business is. Now, I want to tell the FM, hey, you forgot to mention this. This is a huge material thing in your RFP, but it's not in there. I'm going to mention it to you as an alternate. And oh wow, this guy's an expert. He thought of this and nobody else did. So that's why I like the individual meetings. I would say call Saba in separately, call this company in separately, let them each talk to me without the fear of, it going in front of saying anything in front of anybody else, and get that information. And then, like you're saying, to have the larger meeting with everybody, but that meeting itself will then be more informed because you've spoken with these individual people. And what I like to say to my FM friends is, if you interview, 2, 3, 4 of these companies and all these verticals, that you're RFPing on a regular clip, you'll get to know these companies and you'll get to know these people. If you say, if they don't show up on time for your meeting, that's a red flag. If they send in the used car salesman person instead of a consultant like you, and somebody that is willing to walk away from something that's not good, that's a good indicator. If they come in and start talking about themselves and their company history, and instead of asking you questions about your business. Those are all things that you can then also discern, hey, who might be the right company for me. So one of the things Dr. Dean mentions is during those initial meetings is to have them send their problem solver to the meeting. I don't want to meet your business. I don't want to meet your owner. I don't want to meet your CEO. I don't want to meet any of those people. I want to meet the person who solves problems at your company. Bring him or her along and let me talk with them. You know?
Yeah, I think it's always good to meet the team too, and that is really, really important. I'm glad you brought that up because before you make that final decision, you should meet, especially on bigger projects. On small buildings, it's not always that necessary, but on larger projects, all the logistical information comes out to the people that are going to be solving the problems at that point in time, so they know the challenges that they might face, right, and how to overcome them as a teamwork, so with the customer, right. And I think that's important. The other thing that you mentioned, Wayne, and thanks for doing it, the ad alternate is something that when it's appropriate, I always provide. I think that that's really, if you see something as a vendor, you should help your customer to think about it, right? They don't always have to act. They don't always have to act in the course of the RFP. I mean, I negotiate a lot of things after winning RFPs, on the client's behalf because they want them. And if you don't do those ad alternates, sometimes, you're just in the crowd with everybody else.
Right.
So yeah, glad you brought that up.
Yeah. So we did, you mentioned we were talking a little bit about the two, having one vendor servicing your portfolio versus breaking it up into multiple vendors. And you mentioned the one throat to choke concept of having a single vendor do all that, less finger pointing, et cetera. What are your thoughts on subcontracting? So for example, let's say that, you're in certain markets here with your own people, but in certain markets it's subcontracted. What are your feelings on me saying I want to procure a portfolio-wide service through one vendor, one throat to choke, as you say, but I know some of those sites are going to be subcontracted. What should I be watching out for? What should I be looking for in a scenario like that as an FM? Are you going to disclose that, first of all, to the FM and the RFP, or do I have to ask you to disclose that?
Yeah, when writing an RFP, you should always ask that to be disclosed, right? I think that's really, really important. The other thing to understand is in many companies that are out there today that provide that one throat to choke, if you will, service, most of the departments internally are separate. So it can seem like you're working with multiple companies, even though you're working with one. You don't want that experience, right? We manage several services for our clients. They've asked us to, and it doesn't make sense for us to own some of those businesses just because they're a little bit, or I say this night, they're great partners, but it's a different business. Fire extinguishers don't have any wires in them. We're a
Right.
contractor, and for us to own a fire extinguisher company, which is kind of a commodity, it just doesn't always fit the company like ours business models, right? So we partner well, though. We vet out those people. We do the due diligence. We maintain the insurance relationship on a secondary level, but we do all the coordination, right? And I think that's what the FMs really should look for, is who's going to coordinate all these different services. And you really want to get an org chart from people when you do business, and especially on multiple services. But if it were me, I'd want to know that I can always place one phone call to take care of all my problems, and I'm not going to have to get transferred from department to department or company to, some other company is going to schedule my fire extinguisher inspections because they're actually doing them. You want a company like ours to do that, right? You just want one throat really to choke.
Well, I've known you for a while, and you've been so gracious to open up your facilities for many an IFMA meeting over the years. And this is the impression I get from your company. Now, tell me if I got this. The impression is you guys can provide boutique level service at scale. That's kind of what I walk away from, that you guys have that. And it's not this big giant commodified company where you're going to have to go navigate through a phone system and talk to 20 different people for all the different things. It's like you guys seem to have that nailed down. If just from the outside looking in and knowing people that have worked with you, that's what I would look for, is somebody that gives me that boutique experience but can scale it and has a a big machine behind them when necessary.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. We hope that our customers, have that experience, right? And our job is really, and our mission statement is to provide excellence in products and service and an environment that promotes creativity and growth, right? And so we have internal customers and external customers. Having a great place to work where your employees represent you well when they're in the field, really important. I can't tell you how many customers that I've gained because guys show up with no uniform, something as simple as that, right? They're walking in with the basketball team's jersey on, and no badge, no professionalism, and it shows, the way they communicate with customers sometimes. And so, my average employee here, we just got a new census, and we've grown dramatically over the last 10 years, but our average employee's been here over 7.5 years. That's something that you want to look for in a company. It was what I looked for when I came to work here 10 years ago, really. I came from an organization like that, and I wanted that to happen again, right? So having a place where people enjoy working there and represent the company well, really, really something to look for. And sometimes you don't get that until you get the experience, unfortunately.
But that is a good metric.
Invite prospective customers to our site. You've been to our site. We always recommend that they come and see the inner workings, and we're very proud of our space. And every vendor you deal with should have that same pride.
Yeah. That is a good metric. Well, I want to open it up for questions. I have a couple that have come through in the remaining minutes. If you any of the attendees, feel free to type into the chat window any questions you might have, and Joshua can read those out. I'll read the couple I've gotten so far. One is, what do you see as cutting edge changes in technology to this issue, such as IoT, Internet of Things?
Yeah, on the main component of our world, the fire life safety world, it's very difficult to be in the cloud, right? It's just not, it's not the technology, it's not what the technology is for. There's so much supervision that has to happen in a fire alarm system. Still having, wired technology is, I don't see it changing. There have been a couple of companies introduce wireless technology into the marketplace over the last 6-7 years, got it listed and put it into use, and 2 of those companies left the market at the request of the fire marshals, right? So it's not always what it's cracked to be. And the listings and testing for fire alarm equipment to introduce new equipment is really costly through UL and FM and some of the companies out there that do that registration of products. So, however, there are some new technologies out there, right? There are some new technologies in audio and visual notification appliances that reduce the cost of installation dramatically. And it can affect service. And there are some sensing technologies out there at a very large FANG company here in Northern California. We designed some technology for them using aspirating smoke detection that actually allowed them to have a more dense occupancy and reduce stairwells, because we could prove through engineering demonstration and modeling that their egress in the building could be faster. So they were actually able to reduce very large stairwells in a large footprint building, more space. So there's some new voice evacuation that's being used in large logistics facilities. That's very interesting. For those of you that may not be aware of it, it's called Hyperspike. It gave us the ability at one property to solve a problem with 2 speakers that everybody else was going to have to wire thousands of speakers in, and they wouldn't have had the intelligibility in that space. So, you know, those are some new things that are happening. But you probably, and there is some TCP/IP interface of fire alarms now that's been listed, so that's good. We're doing a lot more on fiber and networks to network campuses together, where they used to actually have to have hardwired connections. So panel to panel, building to building, there's been some great innovation there.
Okay, excellent. And next is, do you do? Let me try to translate this here. Okay, so can you provide educational sessions for organizations with their team and sourcing to educate them on this issue? So I guess somebody's asking if you would come in and do a session at their organization to teach them and their coordinators and everybody else about all of this.
Sure, that's actually been a large part of my job over my career, and I've got a couple of people here that do those workshops also. So we do that for a lot of engineering teams and the big facility management groups, and it's always fun to see the light bulbs go off, you know, and wow, I'm supposed to be doing that. They had no idea, you know, and you know, it's we keep it very generic and code based, and we, you know, we're able to show them some of the examples of what they should be looking for, and then of course, you know, this RFP thing is good at the property management level too. So we've got a couple of different more technical, if that's what's required, more code based if that's what's required, or you know, a more in-depth talk than we have time for maybe on the RFP step by step.
Okay. Joshua, did you have any additional chat questions that came through to you?
I think you got them all, sir.
Okay, excellent.
Which actually brings us almost right to the end of the hour, so time goes pretty well.
Excellent. So I mean, in closing, I'll just, you know, from me summing up what I've heard today, and I've had, you know, lengthy conversations with you about this topic in general, RFP sourcing and so forth, is, again, to me, it fits that we've got these experts in IFMA in our local chapters who, you know, are truly subject matter experts. I mean, I'm 33 years into my career. I've forgotten more about the things I know than most people will know, and it's just because I'm not put in my 10,000 hours. I put in probably my 100,000 hours. So yeah. I'm just, you know, I want to just make sure our FMs understand that there are, you know, you can go to IFMA Engage and you can ask your peers and say, hey, you know, what do you think about this? Has anybody done this? And they might have some really good information for you, but nothing is a substitute for talking with a subject matter expert in these areas. It's just, you know, such like I'll quote Dr. Dean again, subject matter experts can predict the future. And you will see something and you'll know if we don't rectify this, this is probably going to be a problem for you. And it's something that, you know, you live and breathe. So I strongly urge people to reach out and Pat, are we able to provide your contact information to our council? Will you be able to? Okay, so we'll provide that.
It's also available on LinkedIn too. So yeah, feel free to provide that information.
Okay, fantastic. Well, you know, Pat, we appreciate you doing this for us, and to Saba, and just really hope that our FM community takes advantage of people like you with this level of knowledge to help improve their RFP process.
Thanks for the opportunity, and I hope it was of value.
Thanks, Pat. Thank you, Joshua.
Great, thank you, and thank you everyone for attending. Have a good one.
Thanks.